Hannah Bennett woke to the sound of her alarm clock buzzing insistently on the nightstand, its steady hum a reminder of the busy day ahead. She blinked herself awake, momentarily disoriented by the soft glow of early morning sunlight peeking through the thin curtains. For a moment, she just lay there, breathing in the familiar scent of clean sheets mixed with the faint citrus note of the cleaning spray she always used. Beside her, the bed was cold and empty. Ethan had left for Boston the previous afternoon to attend yet another corporate seminar as part of his demanding position at Turner & Lane Investments. Their 4-year-old son, Mason, stirred softly in the next room. Hannah could hear the gentle hum of a lullaby playing from the small, bear-shaped nightlight that scattered stars across Mason's ceiling. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and made her way to his room, her mind already ticking through the day's errands. A faint ache pressed behind her ribs, a whisper of dread she wished she could silence. Some mornings, it almost felt like guilt. Was she not enough? Had she done something to push Ethan away? She hated how her mind looped through every small argument, every forgotten anniversary, wondering if she was partly to blame. She planned to surprise Ethan in Boston that evening. For months now, an uneasy feeling had tugged at her, a suspicion she kept brushing aside while Ethan claimed he was swamped with work. She needed to see for herself if everything was really as he said. Scooping Mason into her arms, she buried her face in his hair, breathing in the sweet smell of baby shampoo. She squeezed him a little tighter than usual, the fear prickling behind her eyes. "I'm sorry, baby," she thought. "If I'm wrong, I'll take all the blame." But if she was right, a wave of determination washed over her. She whispered into her son's ear, as if promising herself, "No more pretending, sweetheart. Mommy needs to know the truth." For years, she had trusted Ethan without question. He had always been the steady anchor in her life, the man who found time for bedtime stories and Sunday barbecues, even as he climbed the corporate ladder. But lately, something had shifted. It showed in the way he dodged her eyes at dinner, in the vague excuses after late-night phone calls. Hannah needed the truth, and she was ready to get it. Despite the nagging doubt, she couldn't forget that the man who once charmed her with wildflowers on their first date. Back then, Ethan had been everything to her. They'd met by chance at a photography exhibit in downtown Portland, introduced by friends of friends. Hannah was immediately drawn to his easy laugh and calm self-assurance. They shared a love for visiting art galleries, volunteering at animal shelters, and dreaming of a life full of travel and kids. But as Ethan climbed higher at the firm, business trips became routine. It began with a quick day trip to San Francisco, then a 3-day retreat in Denver. Hannah had pushed aside any unease, reminding herself that she married a driven man. His success was their success. But with each step up the ladder, Ethan's workload exploded. His phone was a constant buzz of alerts, his eyes always shadowed with tension. When she asked questions, he brushed them off. A month ago, Hannah found a receipt tucked in Ethan's jacket pocket from the Grand Oak Hotel in Boston. It was for an extravagant dinner for 2. Ethan had insisted it was just a business dinner with a possible client named Mr. Parker, but the signature on the receipt wasn't in Ethan's handwriting. Warning bells went off in Hannah's head, but fear kept her quiet, afraid of what she might uncover if she pushed too hard. In the back of her mind, she clung to a fragile hope that there was still an innocent reason behind it all. That morning, as she kissed Mason goodbye and left him in her mother's care, Helen Carter, Hannah's stomach twisted with nerves. She lingered by the door longer than usual, brushing a strand of hair from Mason's forehead, silently promising him that everything would be okay, even if her heart wasn't sure at all. Part of her wished she could just turn around, unpack her bag, and crawl back into bed, pretending nothing was wrong. But she knew she'd never sleep again if she didn't face this. She kept telling herself this was just a surprise visit to remind Ethan that his family was right here, loving him and waiting for him. She prayed her suspicions were foolish and that by tonight they'd be laughing about how paranoid she'd been. She had no clue that what she would see in just a few hours would shatter that hope completely. The drive from their quiet neighborhood in Brookside to Boston usually took just over an hour, but traffic dragged it out closer to 2. Hannah kept tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. She caught herself rehearsing lines she'd say if she was wrong. "I'm sorry for doubting you, Ethan. I'll never question you again." Then her chest would clench at how pathetic that sounded, and she'd grip the wheel harder, wishing her mind would stop spinning. Each red light felt like a cruel test of her resolve, and every mile brought her closer to a truth she might not be ready to face. She had planned it carefully. Arrive at the hotel lobby around 7 in the evening, text Ethan to meet her by the grand staircase, and surprise him with a kiss he wouldn't forget. She hoped the unexpected moment would bring back the spark that had dimmed over the past year. As she maneuvered through the busy city streets, Hannah thought back to how much she used to love Boston. She'd gone to college here and always felt energized by its skyline and bustling sidewalks. But today, the city seemed overwhelming, the tall buildings closing in on her. She turned onto Beacon Street, weaving through the evening crowds, her heartbeat picking up with every block. She parked in an underground garage and made her way up to the Harbor Grand Hotel, a towering glass structure that seemed to stretch forever into the sky. Hannah dabbed on a touch of lipstick, checked her reflection in the polished steel of the revolving doors, and drew in a calming breath. Her fingers trembled so badly she almost dropped her purse. "Don't fall apart now," she silently begged herself. She told herself one last time, "Smile, stand tall, no matter what you see." She forced her nerves down. If she was going to confront Ethan, she needed to do it with her head held high. Clutching her purse, she stepped into the spacious lobby with its marble floors and sweeping ceilings. She could almost picture Ethan's shocked grin, the way he'd scoop her up into a playful spin. But as her eyes swept across the lounge and check-in desk, he wasn't there. Instead, something else caught her eye and made her stop cold. Near the softly lit bar, under warm golden lights, sat Ethan. He wasn't alone. A woman with dark, flowing hair leaned in close, her hand resting on his arm in a way that made Hannah's chest tighten. For a split second, she begged herself to believe it was nothing. But deep down, she knew. Maybe it was just some misunderstanding. Maybe she was a coworker, and they were just going over work details. But then Ethan turned to the woman, and their lips met in a slow, unmistakably intimate kiss. Hannah felt like she'd been punched in the gut. A wave of numbness spread through her limbs, pinning her to the spot, while the rest of the lobby blurred until all she could see was her husband kissing a stranger. It felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't snap out of. She stood there, barely 20 feet away, completely invisible to Ethan. The woman, dressed elegantly in a fitted black coat, pulled back and gazed at him with a tenderness Hannah recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who wasn't just a fling. In that split second, Hannah understood with painful clarity this wasn't some harmless mistake. This had been going on long enough for them to feel comfortable flaunting it in public. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but fury quickly smothered her shock. How dare he do this, here, so openly? She wanted to march right over, slap him, scream, make a scene. 1,000 thoughts collided in her head: heartbreak, rage, shame, and the last fragile shred of her pride. But in the end, she drew a trembling breath and forced herself to step back, slipping into the shadows of the wide corridor, leaving Ethan and his mistress oblivious to her presence. She couldn't remember how she'd made it from the hotel to the street. One moment she'd been standing on that cold marble floor, watching the man she trusted betray her. The next, she was stumbling down the sidewalk, gulping in the icy Boston air. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she didn't dare look. If it was Ethan, she couldn't bear to hear his lies. If it was anyone else, she didn't have the strength to explain what she had just seen. She wandered aimlessly through the city for what felt like hours, tears slipping down her cheeks unchecked. In her mind, the scene replayed again and again, each loop cutting deeper. She saw Ethan's smile on their wedding day. She saw the tears in his eyes when Mason was born. She saw all the nights he whispered promises about forever. How could that same man now kiss another woman, as if none of it mattered? Eventually, Hannah found herself near a small park, the soft glow from a nearby cafe highlighting the tears streaking her face. She sank down on a cold bench and let the heartbreak pour out, anger and grief twisting inside her like a storm. She wanted the truth. She deserved answers. But the thought of facing Ethan right now was too much. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back. She forced herself to look. A message from her mom, Helen, asking, "How's the surprise going? Is Ethan excited? Mason keeps asking for his daddy." Hannah's stomach twisted so painfully she almost doubled over. How could she ever explain this to Mason? Her fingers trembled as she typed a quick, shaky reply. "Not great. I'll be home soon." Then she flagged down a cab to get back to her car. Her mind was already spinning with what she'd do next. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She paced the living room restlessly, waiting for Ethan to come back from Boston. She had no intention of confessing that she'd been there too. She wanted to let him lie first, to see just how deep he'd bury himself. It was close to midnight when Ethan finally walked through the front door, a duffel bag hanging from his shoulder and the faint scent of hotel soap still clinging to him. "Hey, babe," he called out, his voice easy, almost warm, like nothing was wrong at all. "Conference ran late. You didn't have to wait up." Hannah forced a tight smile. "I wanted to see you," she answered coolly. Inside, a silent scream coiled in her throat, beating against her ribs until it almost suffocated her. She was astonished at how well he could pretend. Her heart slammed in her chest, every muscle tense with the urge to yell at him, to demand the truth. But she held back, letting the silence stretch between them like a loaded wire. Ethan strolled into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and held it out to her too. When he turned back, Hannah met his gaze without flinching. "Did you have dinner with Mr. Parker again?" she asked, her voice shaking just slightly. He paused, eyes flicking away for a heartbeat before snapping back to hers. "Yeah," he lied smoothly. "All work stuff. Same as before." Hannah's anger burned hot at the obvious lie. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, fingernails biting into her palms. A fierce heat crawled up her neck, shame mixing with rage at how stupid he thought she was. She could feel herself starting to unravel. Suddenly, the dam burst. "Stop lying to me, Ethan. I saw you." The glass slipped from his hand, crashing onto the tile floor and exploding into shards. For a moment, neither of them moved. The truth hung in the air, heavier than all the tension that came before it. "You saw me?" he whispered, the color draining from his face. Hannah swallowed a jagged breath, tears threatening to spill. "I was at the Harbor Grand tonight. I saw you, with her." She hurled the last word at him like poison, each syllable dripping with betrayal. Ethan's mind scrambled behind his eyes, shock, denial, then a flicker of raw panic. He opened his mouth, shut it, then finally forced out, "It's not what you think." Hannah barked out a bitter, broken laugh. "Oh, really? Because it looked like you and that woman were plenty comfortable together." She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "Is she your mistress?" Ethan dragged a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging. She's Rebecca Holt. She works with me. We've been seeing each other." Hannah's stomach flipped violently. She turned away, unable to look at him. She had braced herself for lies, excuses, anything but this blunt confession. It was like a twisted validation that tore her open all the same. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling with a sharp mix of fury and heartbreak. "Why would you do this to us?" He stepped forward but froze when he saw her recoil. His words stumbled out. "It just happened." Ethan tried to explain, his voice shaking. "I've been under so much pressure. Rebecca gets it. She's there late at night, putting in the same hours, handling the same stress." "Don't," Hannah hissed, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Don't you dare blame this on stress and long nights. We have a son, Ethan. We had a life." He wiped a hand across his face. "I never stopped loving you. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." "That's convenient," she spat back, her voice raw. "A mistake? You think saying that makes it better? That everything just goes back to normal?" She turned away, her words dropping to a painful whisper. "I trusted you." Ethan tried to speak again, but she cut him off with a trembling hand. "Don't. It's too late for apologies. You made your choice." With that, she fled to their bedroom, leaving him alone in the kitchen, broken glass and cold water puddling at his feet, a fitting image for the mess he'd made of their marriage. Hannah had always believed she could survive anything, as long as she and Ethan faced it together. But that night, curled into a tight ball on their bed, she realized she was on her own. She hated herself for still longing for the sound of his footsteps outside the door, for wishing, just for 1 weak second, that he'd follow her and beg her forgiveness in a way that might fix it all. Silent sobs shook her shoulders as she buried her face into the pillow, muffling the sound so Mason wouldn't hear. How could the man who once vowed to protect her heart so carelessly crush it instead? The weight of his betrayal crushed her. The man she thought she knew better than anyone had been living a lie. How could she ever trust him again? All night long she lay awake, turning it over in her mind. She could hear Ethan downstairs making phone calls, probably to Rebecca. Was he telling her that Hannah knew now? The thought of them whispering about her pain like it was a minor problem to fix made her feel sick with rage and humiliation. One thing became clear: she couldn't stay here, pretending to be the perfect wife, while Ethan sorted out his affair. When Mason's soft cries broke the early dawn silence, Hannah got up mechanically. She knew exactly what she needed to do. She had to get out. Her first priority was Mason, shielding him from this disaster. When his sleepy eyes opened, she forced a calm, loving smile onto her face, though her heart was breaking inside. Inside, guilt clawed at her. How could she be enough for Mason alone? What if she failed him too? She pressed a kiss to his forehead, whispering, "Mommy's got you. I promise, baby, we're gonna be okay." Once he was fed and dressed, Hannah scribbled a short note for Ethan. "I'm taking Mason away for a while. Don't follow us. We need space." She left it on the kitchen counter, right next to the shards of broken glass Ethan hadn't even bothered to clean up. It was a clear symbol, she realized, of how little he cared about keeping things whole now that his secret was exposed. She packed one suitcase, only the basics. She called her mother, Helen, but there was no answer. She didn't leave a voicemail. She wanted to move quickly, before anyone could stop her. Ethan woke up, unaware that Hannah was already gone, giving herself a head start. Within 30 minutes, she had Mason buckled safely in the back seat and was driving away from the life she thought she'd built forever. She headed east, not entirely sure where she was going. Hannah had a distant aunt in Maine, Margaret, who'd moved years ago to a small cottage near Bar Harbor. Hannah had visited a couple of times as a child. Margaret and Hannah's mother, Helen, had never been especially close, but Hannah remembered her aunt as a kind, if slightly aloof woman. With no better plan, Hannah found Margaret's number in an old address book tucked in the glove compartment. Heart pounding, she dialed it. And to her relief, Margaret picked up on the second ring. After a rushed explanation, careful to skip most of the raw truth, Hannah asked if she and Mason could stay for a while. "We just need to get away," she confessed, her voice trembling. Despite the years of silence, Margaret paused only briefly before agreeing. The promise of a temporary refuge slowed Hannah's racing pulse. A weight she didn't even realize she'd been carrying lifted. Just a little. At least someone still had room for her and Mason when her own husband did not. Yet even as relief flooded her chest, a sharp edge of shame pricked at her. Was she a coward for running? Should she have stayed and fought for her family instead of fleeing into hiding like this? She pressed harder on the gas, determined to put as many miles as possible between her and Ethan. In the back seat, Mason drifted off to sleep, hugging his little stuffed bear. Now and then, Hannah checked the rearview mirror, tears burning her eyes. Guilt stabbed at her for uprooting Mason's world. But deep down, she knew she was protecting him from a storm he was too young to understand. She whispered to the sleeping boy, her voice cracking despite the soft promise, "I'm so sorry, baby. I promise you'll never feel unloved because of this." At least for now, they'd be safe in a quiet cottage by the water, far from the wreckage Ethan's betrayal had caused. As the city skyline faded into endless highway and green fields, Hannah's thoughts tangled into knots. She had no real plan beyond today. The heartbreak was too raw to even think about lawyers or custody battles, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't let Ethan's lies shape her future or Mason's. If he wanted to keep living a double life, he could do it alone. Still, a tiny traitorous thought whispered at the back of her mind. What if leaving him only made her more alone than ever before? What if no one ever loved her the way she once thought he did? Back at the house, Ethan woke to silence that normally felt like peace after a business trip, but now felt suffocating. He rubbed his eyes, grabbed his phone. No new messages from Hannah. Confusion prickled at him. Mason should have been laughing in the living room. Hannah should have been making coffee. He dragged himself out of bed as the memory of last night hit him like poison seeping through his veins. He found Hannah's note on the kitchen counter, right next to the shards of glass he hadn't cleaned up. His stomach dropped as he read, "I'm taking Mason away for a while. Don't follow us. We need space." Shock turned quickly into dread. She was gone, and she'd taken Mason. Running a shaky hand through his hair, Ethan grabbed his phone and called Hannah, but it went straight to voicemail. He dialed Helen next, hoping her mother would know something. But Helen's sharp, worried tone rattled him even more when he told her. "What do you mean she's gone?" Helen demanded. "She left Mason with me yesterday morning. Now you're saying she took him away?" When Ethan's stunned silence answered her, Helen's gasp on the line cut deep. Helen hung up on him, her anger crackling through the line, vowing she'd find her daughter herself. Ethan paced through the house like a caged animal, searching for any hint of where Hannah might have gone. He tore through her desk drawers, checked the bedroom closet, even rummaged in the attic. Nothing. The only evidence was the painfully empty spaces where her clothes had hung. It hit him hard. She'd planned this. She'd packed Mason's things, written that note, and walked out without a backward glance. And it was his fault. He'd brought the lies and betrayal into their marriage. Now he was left alone with the wreckage. The weight of his regret pressed deeper with every passing hour, but regret wouldn't bring Hannah back. If he wanted even a chance to fix this, he'd have to fight for it, though he doubted Hannah would let him. Days dragged into a week, and still no word. Ethan reached out to everyone he could think of, mutual friends, old neighbors, even distant cousins, but no one had any idea where Hannah and Mason were hiding. In a moment of desperation, he confided in his closest friend and coworker, Adam Overton. Adam's response was blunt. "You need a lawyer." Reluctantly, Ethan booked an appointment with Rebecca Slater, one of Boston's top family law attorneys. Sitting in her glass-walled office high above downtown, Ethan felt raw and exposed under her steady gaze as she reviewed the intake forms he'd filled out. "So your wife left," she said, her tone neutral, eyes flicking to him. "And she took your son with her?" He nodded miserably. "Any official paperwork yet? Divorce petition? Custody filing?" "No," Ethan said hoarsely. "Just the note. I've called, texted. She won't answer." Rebecca folded her hands neatly on her desk. "Did you give her a reason to leave?" Heat crawled up Ethan's neck. He cleared his throat. I had an affair. She found out." Rebecca didn't flinch. Infidelity can definitely trigger drastic choices like this. "Look, technically, we can file a petition to establish custody rights. But if she hasn't filed for divorce yet, it's delicate. Sometimes legal action pushes the situation past the point of repair. Are you sure you want to force it right now?" Ethan hesitated, his vision blurring with sudden tears. All he really wanted was to see Hannah again, to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd change. But Hannah was gone, and he had no idea how to reach her. "I just want to see my son," Ethan whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." Rebecca's expression softened just a touch. "Let's hold off on filing anything right away. I'll have someone quietly look into where she might be staying. Once we have a lead, you can decide how to handle it. In the meantime, gather your financial records, property information, everything." Ethan left her office feeling more lost than ever. It struck him like a punch to the gut. He'd set this disaster in motion himself. It started the moment he kissed Rebecca in that hotel bar, the moment he let an affair become more than a fleeting mistake. Now, with Hannah and Mason gone, the hole where his family used to be gaped open and raw. He pressed a palm to his chest as he stepped out onto the city sidewalk, half hoping the icy wind might numb the gnawing ache that wouldn't stop clawing at him. For the first time, the thought of never seeing them again suffocated him. A flicker of shame, sharp and relentless, pierced through his panic. How had he traded everything real for a few stolen nights with someone who meant nothing in the daylight? Meanwhile, Hannah found a fragile sense of calm at Aunt Margaret's little harbor cottage in Maine. Spring was starting to melt the last crusts of snow from around the cabin's edge. Mason, blissfully unaware of the turmoil, loved splashing at the water's edge in his rubber boots, shrieking with laughter when the chilly waves kissed his toes, and proudly collecting shiny rocks for his treasure box. Margaret was a mystery in many ways. She asked no probing questions about Hannah's sudden arrival, instead offering quiet comforts, warm dinners, a soft bed, and a steady, patient presence whenever Hannah needed it. Sometimes, Hannah caught Margaret watching her with a worried tenderness, as if she knew exactly how far a woman could bend before she broke. Hannah felt deeply thankful for the sanctuary. When she couldn't sleep, she'd tiptoe down to the dock and stand alone under the moon, staring out at the glassy water. The stillness mirrored her own drifting state, adrift, uncertain of her next step, but certain she couldn't go back. In that darkness, she whispered confessions to the waves that she couldn't say aloud to anyone, that she missed him. That part of her still wanted to believe every apology, every lie, because being angry hurt less than loving someone who betrayed you. One evening, Margaret joined her, handing her a steaming mug of chamomile tea. They stood together in silence for a long while, the night air carrying a cool breeze across the dark water. At last, Margaret spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't need to know every detail, Hannah, but I can see the hurt in your eyes." Hannah swallowed hard, tears stinging. "He cheated," she said simply. "I saw him, there's no doubt." Margaret let out a quiet sigh. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." She laid a comforting hand on Hannah's shoulder. "I won't tell you what to do. Just know you're not alone. If you need time, if you need help, this door stays open." Hannah let out a shaky breath. "I just can't believe he'd throw everything away like that. Now I'm terrified. Terrified he'll try to take Mason. Or that I'll never be strong enough to stand on my own again." Her voice cracked. "Sometimes I wonder if I even deserve better. If maybe I was too boring, too predictable to keep him." Margaret's eyes held hers, unwavering and kind. "You're stronger than you think. Start with today. Keep you and Mason safe. Keep your head clear. One step at a time." In the weeks that followed, Hannah found small comfort in helping Margaret around the cottage. She raked away dead leaves, planted spring flowers, and let the simple routine settle her mind. Mason flourished with the open space, chasing butterflies, squealing with joy whenever a duck drifted close to the shore. The ache of betrayal never fully left, but day by day, Hannah felt something solid rebuilding inside her. A seed of strength, steady and real. Back in Boston, Rebecca Holt, Ethan's mistress, was wrestling with her own consequences in the wake of Hannah's sudden disappearance. Ethan had started pulling away from her, his mind too tangled with guilt and fear. Their once heated affair? What had once been fueled by late-night brainstorming sessions and stolen hallway kisses was now curdling under the weight of real consequences. Rebecca was no stranger to ambition. She thrived in the cutthroat world at Turner & Lane Investments. But rumors had a way of sticking to boardroom walls. Whispers about the married Ethan Bennett's affair spread like wildfire, and it didn't take long for people to point fingers at Rebecca. The sideways glances and quiet gossip gnawed at her confidence every time she stepped into the office. One evening, she cornered Ethan at a discreet cafe a few blocks from their building, needing answers about his sudden, chilly distance. "I feel like you're punishing me for something we both chose," Rebecca said, frustration tightening her voice. Ethan rubbed his forehead, exhaustion carved into every line on his face. He looked older, worn down. "I'm not punishing you," he said quietly. I'm worried about Hannah and Mason. They're gone, Rebecca. I have no idea where they are, and it's my fault." She reached for his hand across the table, but he pulled back before she could touch him. The sting of rejection made her chest tighten. "You can't blame yourself alone," she pushed gently. "We both knew exactly what we were doing. Hannah finding out, there was never going to be an easy way." Ethan stared into his coffee, voice flat. "That doesn't make it any better. I have to fix this somehow. But I don't even know where to start. Everything's a mess." Seeing the distance that had cracked wide open between them, Rebecca felt a pulse of resentment. She had risked her reputation and her heart on a man now drowning in guilt and shutting her out. Still, she clung to the belief that what they had was more than lust. It had to be, didn't it? Frustrated with Rebecca Slater's slow legal maneuvering and desperate for a lead, Ethan decided to hire a private investigator named Jason Rudd. Jason came highly recommended by Adam Overton, who had once relied on him for a delicate corporate problem. Ethan hated the thought of spying on Hannah, but he convinced himself it was the only way to see Mason again. Jason was a middle-aged man with a calm, almost unsettling focus. He listened closely as Ethan described how Hannah had left the note and vanished without a trace. "She's not using her cards or her phone. At least nothing I can track," Ethan said, anxiety seeping into every word. Jason nodded thoughtfully. "She's smart, probably using cash or another account you don't know about." He tapped his pen against a legal pad. "Does she have family she might trust? Friends outside your usual circle?" Ethan thought immediately of Helen, but Hannah's mother seemed as clueless as he was. Mom's side, Margaret or something? They weren't very close. Jason scribbled down the name Margaret. "Good enough. Sign these," he said, handing Ethan a stack of authorization forms. "I'll check phone logs, any property in that name. It might take time, but we'll find them." As Ethan signed, his heart pounded with tangled emotions. Hiring a PI felt like violating Hannah's privacy, but the thought of doing nothing, of never seeing Mason again, was unbearable. He told himself this was for Mason, to be a father again, to mend what he'd destroyed. But a flicker of dread kept whispering. What would he even say if he found her? Could they possibly rebuild what he'd shattered? Would she ever forgive him? He pressed the pen so hard it nearly tore the paper, a small, useless show of control over the mess he'd made. The shame crawled under his skin like fire ants. What if Mason grew up remembering him as the man who hurt his mother? What if, years later, Mason hated him for pushing Hannah so far she ran away? The more he thought it, the more the forms in front of him blurred. Questions with no answers, but desperation pushed him on. Back in Maine, Hannah's days settled into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast with Aunt Margaret and Mason, long walks along the harbor's edge, short trips into the nearby village for groceries. She had enough savings to last a while, and Margaret refused to accept a single dollar for rent, insisting that Hannah's company was more than enough. Yet Hannah knew she couldn't hide here forever. Late at night, she pored over articles about divorce laws, spousal support, custody rights. The endless legal terms blurred on the screen until her head ached. She filled a notebook with scribbled questions, hoping that one day soon she'd find the courage and the money to get real legal advice. Sometimes, after Mason fell asleep, she'd stand in the bathroom, gripping the sink until her knuckles went white, asking herself over and over if leaving had been right. If maybe she was selfish for tearing her son away from his father's arms, even if that father had betrayed her. The questions never stopped. Sometimes she caught herself staring out the window, imagining Ethan showing up at the end of the drive. Part of her terrified he might, part of her ashamed that a tiny corner of her heart wished he would. One afternoon, Hannah's prepaid phone, a cheap one she'd bought under a false name, buzzed unexpectedly. To her shock, it was her mother, Helen. Hannah froze, torn between longing to hear her mom's voice and fear that Ethan might be monitoring the call. "Mom," she whispered, slipping out onto the cabin's porch. "Oh, thank God." Helen burst out, her relief clear as day. "Hannah, are you okay? Ethan told me you left, but swears he doesn't know where you are." Hannah's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. She missed her mother so badly, but she couldn't risk giving anything away. "We're safe," she said softly. "I can't tell you where. Not yet." Helen sniffled on the other end. "I won't push, I needed to know you're all right. And Mason, he's okay?" "He's fine, Mom. He's healthy. He's happy." Hannah's eyes drifted to the water's edge where Mason was laughing and chasing a butterfly across the grass. He betrayed me, Mom. I can't go back." "Not now." Helen's voice cracked. "I understand, sweetheart. I don't even know what to think of Ethan anymore. He seems truly torn up. But this is your call. I trust you. Sweetheart, just promise me you'll stay in touch. I won't tell him anything you don't want me to," Helen pleaded gently. Hannah let herself feel a flicker of comfort. "Thank you, Mom. I'll call again soon." When she ended the call, Hannah felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. She'd reconnected with her mother, but shutting Ethan out completely still weighed on her. Yet every time she pictured him with Rebecca, the betrayal flared fresh and raw. She reminded herself, she was protecting Mason. She owed Ethan nothing right now. Back in Boston, Jason Rudd's search finally paid off. He traced a property under the name Margaret Carter, a modest harborside cottage in Maine. Utility records showed a sudden spike in usage, hinting at new residents. One morning, Jason met Ethan at a quiet cafe, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "This is probably where your wife's staying," Jason said plainly. "All signs point there. She's been there a few weeks at least." Ethan's hands shook as he flipped through the paperwork. A deed with Margaret's name, small bank charges for groceries, and a few discreet photos of Hannah's car tucked away off a gravel road. Guilt and hope twisted painfully in his chest. She was safe. Mason was safe. They were close enough to reach by car. "What do I do now?" Ethan asked in a small voice. Jason shrugged. "That's up to you. Legally, you could press for her return or force a custody discussion. But if you actually want to patch things up, showing up with court papers probably isn't the best move." Ethan swallowed, an image of Hannah's devastated face haunting him. "I just want to see my son," he murmured, "and I want Hannah to know how sorry I am." Jason gave him a curt nod. "Then go, but do it gently." Fueled by this new hope, Ethan set out that same afternoon. The drive felt endless, every thought spiraling into a storm. Would Hannah even open the door? Would she let Mason see him? Did he deserve a second chance? Each mile closer made his chest tighten with dread and longing. By late evening, long shadows stretched over the narrow road as Ethan pulled up near the address Jason had given him. The cottage sat near the water, soft yellow light glowing through the windows. He parked a short distance away, his pulse hammering so loudly it drowned out the sound of the waves. His footsteps thudded unnaturally loud on the wooden porch. Before he could knock, the door opened. Margaret stood there, calm but stern, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan," she said, her voice cool. "I knew you'd show up sooner or later." He nodded, throat dry. "May I see Hannah?" Margaret stepped aside but didn't invite him in. "I'll get her. Wait here." Moments later, Hannah stepped into the doorway. She went pale at the sight of him, her eyes flicking back into the house to make sure Mason was still asleep in the other room. She stepped out onto the porch, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "How did you find us?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. Ethan flexed his hands helplessly. "I had to. I hired a PI. Hannah, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" she shot back, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You come here armed with a private investigator's proof, spying on me, and now you say you're sorry?" He blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I couldn't just do nothing, Hannah. Please. I had to see Mason. I'm not here to take him away, I swear. I want to see my son, and I want to talk. Please, can we talk?" Hannah glared at him, her emotions battling behind her eyes. She glanced back at the cottage, where Margaret lingered in the doorway, watching protectively. Finally, Hannah let out a tense breath. "Fine, but Mason is asleep, and if you wake him up, I swear to God." "I won't," Ethan promised. She turned and led him across the small yard to the dock by the harbor. Moonlight shimmered across the rippling water, turning everything silvery and surreal. They stopped at the end of the wooden planks, the quiet lap of waves underlining the raw tension between them. They stood wordless for a moment, until Ethan's voice cracked through the silence. "I've been going crazy, not knowing where you were, or if you were safe." Hannah's jaw clenched. "We're safe enough," she said curtly, her eyes locked on the moonlit water. "And Mason's fine too. No thanks to you." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I deserve that. I do. I don't know if it means anything now, but I ended things with Rebecca. It's over. I told her it's done. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. I'll do anything to prove to you that I still want our marriage." Hannah turned toward him slowly, tears brimming. "Our marriage?" she echoed, her voice breaking. "You broke our marriage the second you slept with her. Do you have any idea what it did to me, watching you kiss her in that lobby like I didn't even exist?" Ethan's eyes flooded. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I was an idiot. I got swept up in work, the rush. None of it means anything now. There's no excuse. I just want a chance to fix it." A bitter laugh ripped from Hannah's throat, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Fix it? How, Ethan? You think I can erase that image from my mind? Pretend it never happened?" Her voice shook with rage. "You lied, over and over, about trips, dinners with Mr. Parker, all of it. You chose her over us." "I never chose her over you," Ethan burst out, words tumbling recklessly. "I was confused, I was." Hannah raised a trembling hand, cutting him off. Her hand shot up to stop him. "That's the thing, Ethan. You did choose her. Every time you went to her hotel room, every time you worked late for those so-called meetings. Now it's too late to say it was just a mistake. The damage is done. Ethan's breath caught painfully. Do you hate me? Hannah's tears fell freely now. I hate what you did. I hate that I look at Mason and have to remember how you betrayed us. But I'm also hurt and... She choked on the words. And part of me still loves you. I hate that most of all. She hated that deep down beneath the fury, a soft ache still whispered. Maybe he could come back. Maybe he could fix it. The thought made her want to scream at herself. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, trying to silence the sob that ripped through her chest. The raw confession left her shaking. A strangled sob escaped Ethan's lips. He reached for her, but she stepped back out of reach. They stood there, raw and broken under the moonlight, an unspoken canyon yawning wide between them. Their conversation dragged into the early hours. Hannah wouldn't let him set foot inside the cottage, but she finally agreed to let him see Mason in the morning. Under the cold starlight, they discussed logistics. How Ethan could visit without shattering the fragile peace she'd built. How they'd handle money for now. Her voice never cracked, but inside, every word felt like cutting herself open again and again. When Hannah finally slipped back inside, Ethan crawled into the back seat of his car and tried to sleep. His mind spun with Hannah's tearful anger and the faint, trembling hope that she hadn't outright declared their marriage dead. At dawn, Mason's sweet voice roused Hannah from an uneasy sleep. He was chattering excitedly about seeing ducks on the shore. Hannah's heart clenched. She knew Ethan was waiting just outside. She made up her mind quickly and led Mason to the porch. There stood Ethan, dark circles under his eyes, a wary, longing smile on his lips. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, crouching down to Mason's level. Mason looked unsure at first, hugging Hannah's leg tightly. For a moment, a flicker of heartbreak crossed Ethan's face. He reached out carefully, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, Mason stepped forward. "Daddy missed you so much," Ethan whispered, gathering him into a gentle hug. His eyes squeezed shut, as if holding Mason might keep the rest of his broken world from slipping away entirely. Hannah watched, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes again. She reminded herself, Mason deserved his father, no matter how flawed. That tiny reunion carved fresh cracks into Hannah's defenses. Part of her wanted to shove Ethan away all over again. Another part, traitorous and exhausted, wanted to curl into him and pretend none of this had ever happened. She hated herself for wanting that. They spent a tense half-hour together, Ethan helping Mason toss breadcrumbs to the ducks while Hannah stood back, arms crossed protectively. When Mason turned and asked in his small, earnest voice if Daddy was coming home, Hannah's throat closed up. She could only shake her head. Ethan glanced at her, regret etched deep in his eyes. "Let's take this one step at a time," he murmured, speaking more to Hannah than to Mason. She gave him a stiff nod, swallowing the pain. For Mason's sake, she told herself, they had to find a way to coexist, whatever that meant. Over the next few days, Ethan rented a modest cabin a few miles down the shoreline. Hannah allowed him carefully supervised visits, making sure Mason didn't feel confusion or the sting of broken promises ever again. It was an uneasy truce. Hannah refused to talk about any permanent reconciliation. Her wounds were still too raw, but she didn't push for a divorce either, torn between the stubborn remnants of her love for Ethan and the deep, festering anger he'd left behind. Aunt Margaret quietly watched the fragile dance between them, offering Hannah gentle words of support but never pushing. She saw the storm in Hannah's eyes, knew how heartbreak, betrayal, and lingering love could twist a person in knots. Sometimes Hannah and Ethan found themselves slipping into old, familiar talk. Mason's bedtime rituals, his favorite nursery rhymes, what he'd eaten for lunch that day. These ordinary exchanges felt strangely comforting, like faint echoes of the life they once shared. Sometimes, after these brief, almost normal conversations, Hannah would retreat to her room and cry into her pillow, ashamed that part of her still wanted to believe him when he promised to do better. She hated that softness inside her, yet couldn't rip it out. Meanwhile, Ethan's guilt never let him breathe easy. He kept his distance, careful not to overstep. Each time he saw Mason's face light up when he arrived, a sharp mix of joy and sorrow tore at him. Would Hannah ever truly forgive him? Or was this it? A half-existence as a father, while Hannah pieced her world back together without him. 1 month into this fragile arrangement, Rebecca showed up unannounced. She'd traced Ethan's sudden disappearance from work, caught wind of where Hannah might be, and came to confront him herself. Her arrival cracked the delicate peace Hannah and Ethan were trying to maintain. Rebecca appeared at Ethan's rented cabin, her eyes burning with betrayal and fury. "You haven't answered a single call or text," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "I had to track you down myself. So this is where you've run off to? Playing family with your wife again?" Ethan stiffened. "It's not like that," he said, trying to keep his voice low. "Rebecca, I told you, it's over. Hannah and Mason are my family. I'm trying to fix what I destroyed." Rebecca barked out a bitter laugh. "Fix things? You really think you can waltz away from me, from everything we had? And now just patch up your perfect little life?" She waved a hand at the modest cabin, her scorn unmistakable. Anger and embarrassment prickled under Ethan's skin. "We both made a mistake," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to do the right thing now. There's nothing left to talk about." Unfortunately, Hannah had just arrived at that exact moment, planning to drop Mason off for his visit with Ethan. She froze on the path when she saw Rebecca, her heart thundering in her chest, anger flaring all over again. Rebecca turned at the sound of footsteps, her glare sharpening like ice. "So this is her, the saint you ran crawling back to." Rebecca sneered, her voice dripping contempt. "Isn't it ironic, Hannah? You ran, he chased you, and now the mistress gets left in the dust." Before Hannah could fire back, Ethan stepped forward. "Rebecca, that's enough. This is between me and Hannah." But Hannah couldn't hold back her rage. She stormed up to Rebecca, her voice trembling but fierce. "Don't you dare twist this. You tore our marriage apart, and now you have the audacity to show up here?" Rebecca's eyes flashed dangerously. "Your marriage was already a disaster, sweetheart. That's why Ethan came to me in the first place." Before she could say another word, Hannah's hand flew. She slapped Rebecca hard across the face. Rebecca staggered back, eyes wide with stunned fury. From the car, Mason, strapped into his car seat, began to cry at the sudden commotion. Ethan rushed to calm him, but tears stung Hannah's eyes as she realized how thin the veneer of civility really was. With a shaking breath, she turned to Ethan, her voice low and tight. This is exactly why I left. There's no peace with you, only lies and chaos." And in that moment, Hannah made her final decision. No more hesitation, no more living in limbo. She would end this for good, and protect herself and her son once and for all. That evening, Hannah called a divorce attorney in Bar Harbor named Michael Sanders, recommended by a kind local acquaintance. She poured out her story: Ethan's betrayal, her temporary stay with Margaret, her fears for Mason's well-being. Michael listened calmly, then laid out her options. "Given your situation, we can file here in Maine once you establish residency," he explained. "However, your husband may try to contest jurisdiction from Massachusetts, so we'll need to handle this carefully to protect you and your son." Hannah nodded, her hands trembling around her phone. But inside, she felt a strange clarity settle, like a heavy weight finally sliding off her shoulders. She was done hiding. She would fight for Mason's security and her own peace. The next day, she met Michael in person. His office was modest but neat, and his calm, steady presence gave her hope. She handed him a folder of notes and documents she'd painstakingly gathered. Evidence of Ethan's affair, financial statements, Mason's birth certificate. "I have to do this," she said, her voice wavering but sure. "I can't live in this half-life anymore." Michael squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're making a strong, brave choice. We'll file the paperwork right away. Be prepared. Your husband might contest it, and it could get messy. But I'll be right here to guide you through every step." Hannah exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she whispered, tears brimming. "All I want is peace, for Mason and for me." When Ethan received the divorce papers by courier at his rented cabin, a wave of nausea nearly knocked him over. He'd expected this day to come, but seeing it spelled out in legal black and white cut deeper than he was ready for. Ignoring the voice in his head telling him not to, he rushed straight to Hannah's cottage. Margaret answered, her disapproval sharp in her eyes, but she allowed him in when he begged for a moment alone with Hannah. In the living room, Hannah stood waiting, her arms folded, her face calm but tired. "You got the papers," she said evenly. Ethan held up the envelope, his hands trembling. Is this really what you want? Hannah swallowed, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears she refused to let fall. I don't see any other way, Ethan. You cheated on me, and then you dragged all this chaos into our safe place. I can't keep Mason in the middle of that. He deserves better than this mess. Ethan sank onto the edge of the couch, shaking his head in defeat. I know I destroyed everything. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but can't we at least try counseling? A trial separation instead of jumping straight to divorce? For a heartbeat, Hannah softened, her gaze drifting toward the hallway where Mason was giggling at something on TV. I wish I could say yes, she said softly. But we tried living in the same world, Ethan. Look how fast it fell apart. Rebecca showed up and ripped the wound open again. I can't live like this anymore. My heart can't take it. I have to move on. Ethan felt tears burning hot behind his eyes. His voice broke. What about custody? I don't want to lose Mason, Ethan said hoarsely. Hannah's jaw tightened. We'll work out an arrangement. He needs his father, but not if it means I have to live in constant pain. Ethan nodded, tears slipping down his face. I understand. He stood there clutching the divorce papers like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Before leaving, he whispered brokenly, I'm sorry, Hannah. I love you. I always will. She didn't reply as he walked out the door. Only after the door clicked shut did Hannah let herself collapse to the floor, sobbing softly while Aunt Margaret sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. In the corner of her mind, an old voice whispered, what if I can't really do this alone? What if I'm making everything worse for Mason? She hated that fear, hated how it wormed into the spaces left behind by Ethan's betrayal. The weeks that followed blurred into endless paperwork, mediation sessions, and tense negotiations. Hannah stood firm on having primary custody of Mason, with Ethan allowed regular scheduled visits. Despite his initial pushback, Ethan finally agreed. Realizing a bitter court battle would only hurt Mason, the one piece of their life he was determined to protect. Rebecca, stunned by rejection and the tarnish on her career, distanced herself completely from Ethan. She eventually left Turner & Lane Investments altogether, heading to New York to chase a fresh start. The last Ethan heard, she'd launched herself into another high-pressure job, leaving Boston and him behind for good. As the divorce inched forward, Hannah found support in places she hadn't expected. Helen visited the Harbor Cottage often, spending time with Mason and giving Hannah a steady shoulder to lean on. Slowly, the crushing pain in Hannah's chest eased, replaced by a cautious flicker of hope. Yet on the loneliest nights, she would lie awake replaying her choices, questioning if she was truly strong enough to carry this new life alone, wondering if the wounds Ethan left behind would ever stop throbbing. She dipped her toes back into work, picking up freelance writing gigs online, using her communications background to carve out an income. Ethan, too, had to pick up the pieces. He resigned from Turner & Lane after the scandal and accepted a humbler role at a smaller firm. He started therapy, determined to understand the blind spots that had wrecked his life. Though heartbreak clung stubbornly to him, he found quiet comfort knowing he was still a father to Mason, spending weekends and holidays with him as promised in the custody agreement. Eventually, the divorce was final. The day Hannah held the final decree in her hands, she stood alone by the harbor, wine tugging at her hair, a soft sense of closure washing over her. She had loved Ethan fiercely, part of her always would, but love alone couldn't fix everything. Mason toddled up to her, beaming, a shiny shell clutched in his little hand. For you, Mommy, he chirped proudly. Hannah knelt down, took the shell, and wrapped him in a gentle hug. Thank you, baby, it's beautiful. From the porch, Margaret watched with a quiet, warm smile. She remembered the frightened young woman who had arrived on her doorstep months ago, desperate for a safe place to land. Now Hannah stood straighter, calmer, still healing, but no longer fragile. That evening, Hannah sat at her laptop, browsing rental listings for a small place of her own, not too far from Margaret's cottage. She wanted Mason to grow up close to the peaceful harbor, but needed to build her own nest, her own fresh start. When her phone rang, she saw Ethan's name flash on the screen. He was calling to confirm his visit with Mason that weekend. Hannah's hand hovered for a heartbeat before she answered. Their conversation was civil, even kind. And in that simple exchange, Hannah realized that while their marriage was beyond repair, they could still build something new. An amicable, steady partnership as co-parents. And so, life began anew for Hannah Bennett. No longer the suburban wife, clinging to the illusion of a perfect family, but a single mother, forging her own path with quiet strength, protecting the little boy at her side, and tending gently to her own wounded heart. This was the story of a betrayal that shattered her, a bold escape that saved her, and a mother's fierce determination to shield her child, no matter what. Hannah Bennett's world turned upside down the moment she found her husband in that hotel lobby, yet she somehow found the strength to walk away and rebuild, even when her heart ached with leftover love and deep loss. Through family, quiet solitude, and an unshakable devotion to her son, she carved out a new life for them both. They say every marriage hides secrets, some so small they slip unnoticed, others so huge they can rip trust right from its roots. But what if that secret is exposed under the harshest light imaginable, a bustling upscale restaurant? And what if, at that exact moment, a wife learns her husband has betrayed her while she's carrying his child? Should she protect him, destroy him, or blow up their world in one reckless decision? This story follows the meteoric rise and brutal downfall of Daniel Whitmore, a man who seemed untouchable until one dinner turned his life into a wildfire of scandal and legal ruin. Daniel Whitmore had always radiated a confidence that skated the edge of arrogance. He was the kind of man you couldn't ignore in a crowded room, tall, immaculately groomed, with a gaze so direct you'd swear he saw the truth you weren't ready to share. At 37, he was already CEO of one of the fastest-growing private tech investment firms on the East Coast, Whitmore Capital Partners, headquartered in downtown Boston. Industry insiders whispered all kinds of breathless comparisons. He's the next Elon Musk, or he's gunning to rival Gates in philanthropy. Daniel soaked it up, feeding every rumor into his restless drive to conquer more. He'd lie awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, chasing numbers in his head, fighting the fear that someday all of it, his empire, his image, even Caroline, might slip through his fingers if he ever dared to slow down. Every whispered compliment only made him push harder, sleep less, chase more, always one step ahead of the wolves at his back. He'd grown up far from boardrooms and gala fundraisers, in a cramped house in Rochester, New York, the son of a high school librarian and a laid-off construction worker. By the time he was 12, Daniel had sworn he would never again taste the sting of scarcity. If there was a peak to climb, he'd scale it first. If there was a rival in his way, he'd crush them or buy them out. After his first big win, a risky buyout of a floundering software startup that earned him a clean $20 million by the age of 26, Daniel was hooked on the rush of risk and reward. His wife, Caroline Whitmore, was the steady foundation behind his towering ambition. Once Caroline Morgan, she came from an entirely different orbit. The cherished only child of an old Connecticut family with deep real estate roots. Her father, Richard Morgan, owned a boutique firm that managed historic properties for the city's wealthiest families. Caroline carried herself with an effortless elegance that Daniel craved. Though he could dazzle a pitch room, he often stumbled through the etiquette of high society. Caroline taught him how to mingle, charm, and command a room not with brashness, but with poise. In his darkest moments, he'd remember her calm voice in his ear at countless black tie galas. Shoulders back, Daniel. Smile, but not too wide. Let them come to you. And when the suit came off and the lights went down, she was the only one who ever saw how badly he feared becoming that broke kid in Rochester again. For 6 years, their marriage had been a cocktail of passion, ambition, and simmering frustration, mostly because Daniel poured every ounce of himself into Whitmore Capital. Caroline had pleaded with him for years to start a family. He always promised, soon, pushing it down his endless priority list. But at last, to Caroline's breathless delight, she was pregnant. Daniel, for his part, seemed genuinely excited, though many nights he didn't come home until after midnight, exhausted, mumbling about client dinners or late-night strategy sessions. Still, Caroline trusted him. She trusted his vision, his drive, and his promise to provide not just for her but for the baby they'd soon welcome. Even if their love had settled into the hum of routine, she believed Daniel would protect their family. She had no idea her entire world would be upended by a single, simple choice: agreeing to meet an old friend for dinner in the heart of Boston. Caroline hadn't planned to be at the upscale restaurant Briar and Oak that night. She was 8 months pregnant and more worn out than usual, but her college friend, Melanie Carter, was passing through Boston for the first time in years and insisted on seeing her. To Caroline, it felt like an unexpected reprieve. A small escape from waiting alone on the sofa for Daniel to come home at whatever hour he pleased. Melanie had picked Briar and Oak because she'd seen it featured in a luxury magazine. Inside, the restaurant shimmered with crystal chandeliers, and each table was tucked behind semi-translucent screens that glowed with soft amber light. A gentle hum of whispered conversations drifted through the air, punctuated by the occasional chime of polished cutlery on fine china. Caroline arrived early, pausing at the hostess stand to steady herself, one hand pressed to her rounded belly. A kind staff member hurried over, guiding her to a plush velvet seat and offering a cool glass of water. She felt slightly out of place in her simple maternity dress, surrounded by elegant women in sleek cocktail gowns and men in tailored suits. But she brushed the feeling aside. She was here for Melanie, not to impress Boston's glittering elite. While she waited, Caroline decided to freshen up. On her way back to her table, something caught her eye through the gauzy screen of a private dining alcove. At first, she didn't know why she'd stopped. She could see a man's silhouette, tall, self-assured, and across from him, the outline of a woman with flowing dark hair. Caroline's heart stuttered. The tilt of his head, the familiar way he gestured. God, that was Daniel's exact mannerism. But it couldn't be. Daniel had told her he was stuck in an urgent meeting clear across the city. Pulse racing, Caroline inched closer to the screen, careful to stay hidden behind the heavy drapery separating the main dining room from the private alcoves. When a waiter passed by, she pretended to examine an oil painting on the wall until he moved on. Then she looked back. Yes, it was him. Daniel, in the charcoal suit he reserved for special private events, not boardroom dinners. And his companion was no colleague. The woman radiated an icy, striking beauty. Caroline didn't recognize her at first. Maybe a client, she told herself desperately. But then she saw the woman's slim hand slide across the table, fingers curling intimately over Daniel's. It was a lover's touch, not a business handshake. Caroline's stomach twisted. A wave of dizziness threatened to buckle her knees. She nearly lunged forward to storm in and confront him. Demand answers, demand an explanation. But instinct overruled rage. She wasn't ready for that scene. Not here, not now, not when she was 8 months pregnant and alone. So she watched. Daniel leaned in, murmuring something that made the woman, Sabrina Chen, she caught from snippets of hushed laughter, tilt her head and giggle, her glossy black hair falling around her face. Daniel reached out and tucked a strand behind her ear. Caroline's hands trembled violently, tears pressing at the backs of her eyes. She pressed herself flat against the wall, fighting the urge to collapse right there. She needed air. She needed to get out. Turning away, she nearly collided with a startled Melanie, who was just stepping inside the restaurant. Melanie's eyes widened at the sight of Caroline's pale, stricken face. "Caroline? Oh my God, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, grasping Caroline's arms in gentle alarm. In a strangled whisper, Caroline rasped. Caroline managed to whisper, "I'm not feeling well, Mel. Can we please just go somewhere else?" Melanie, always attuned to her, didn't press. She gently looped her arm through Caroline's and led her outside, hailed a cab, and insisted they head straight back to Caroline's penthouse so she could rest. Caroline mumbled that she didn't want to be alone, that she needed to talk. Inside the taxi, the words tumbled out. She told Melanie everything. How Daniel was there in a private alcove with another woman, clearly far more than just a business contact. Melanie's face darkened with outrage. "You need to confront him," she said fiercely. "He can't get away with this, especially now, with you about to have his child." But Caroline sat frozen, mind spinning with 100 tangled thoughts, none of them good. Part of her wanted to slip back into denial, pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Another part needed the raw truth to slap her awake. By the time they reached her building, she knew what she had to do. She would wait for Daniel to come home. He would have to stand in front of her and lie to her face, or tell her everything. The night crawled by, minute by painful minute. Melanie offered to stay, but Caroline insisted she needed to face Daniel alone. Melanie left only after making Caroline promise she'd call if she needed her, no matter the hour. When the door shut behind her friend, the penthouse felt impossibly vast and hollow. Caroline curled up on the couch, still wearing her maternity dress and heels, her phone clutched in a trembling grip. Inside her belly, the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the storm roiling through her. Somewhere past midnight, exhaustion won out, and she drifted off under the soft glow of a floor lamp. She jolted awake at the quiet click of the front door. Daniel stepped inside, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, tie loosened, and froze when he saw her sitting up in the half-light. "You're still awake?" he asked, crossing the room with practiced ease. He bent to press a kiss to her forehead, but she flinched back. She could smell wine on his breath. Her anger rose like a tide, spilling past the dam she'd tried to hold all evening. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Daniel paused mid-motion, caught off guard by her sharp tone. "I told you. I had a meeting." "Don't lie to me." Caroline's voice broke as she pushed herself to her feet. "I saw you, Daniel. I saw you at Briar and Oak with some woman, Sabrina Chen. You were touching her hair." His face went pale, then hardened into something cold and defensive. "You were spying on me?" "Caroline, what the hell were you doing there?" "Having dinner with a friend," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "But that's not the point. Don't turn this around. Tell me the truth." He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing the living room like a cornered animal. "She's just a client. Nothing more. The hair thing. It was just a friendly gesture. You know how these high-net investors can be. They like to feel personally connected. She's considering a huge stake in Whitmore Capital." Caroline stared at him, her chest tight with disbelief. "I'm not an idiot, Daniel. I know what I saw. That wasn't a harmless dinner with a client." Daniel exhaled sharply, lips pressed into a thin line. "Okay, yes, we're close. But it's complicated. Sabrina has deep ties with big Asian stakeholders. If I don't keep her happy, we risk losing millions. It's business, Caroline." Her voice rose, ragged and raw. "So you're sleeping with her to land a deal?" "It's not that simple," Daniel snapped, but he didn't deny it outright. "She's flirtatious, sure. Maybe I crossed a line. But this is for the company, for us. For our future." Rage gave Caroline a sudden, fierce strength that made her stand taller, despite the weight of her pregnancy pressing on her back. "Our future? Our baby's future?" she seethed. "This is how you plan to protect it? By betraying your wife?" Daniel's eyes flickered with guilt, but then hardened again, stubborn and defensive. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Caroline. Whitmore Capital is on the brink of something huge. A single major investment could catapult us into the big leagues," Daniel insisted, his voice harsh with conviction. "I can't afford to let moral scruples slow me down." Caroline felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. She'd always known Daniel's ambition bordered on obsession, but hearing him admit he'd thrown away their marriage, their trust, for the sake of a deal, she was at a loss for words. A wave of bone-deep exhaustion and raw heartbreak crashed over her. "Get out," she finally rasped, her voice thin but unwavering. "Caroline," he started, trying to soften his tone. She turned away, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly. "Sleep in the guest room. I can't even look at you right now." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the fight drained out of him. Wordlessly, he retreated down the hall, leaving Caroline to sink onto the couch, tears spilling down her cheeks. Half asleep, half weeping. Only one question pulsed through her mind like a wound. How could he do this to us? Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, rousing Caroline from a fitful, aching sleep. She sat up, body stiff from the night on the couch. For one foolish second, she almost expected Daniel to appear, contrite, desperate to explain himself better than it's for the company. But the apartment was hushed and empty. She checked the guest room. He was gone. No note, no message, just the lingering trace of his cologne in the hallway. Bitterness coiled in her chest like a snake. He'd simply gone to work, pretending none of it had happened. Trying to hold herself together, Caroline drifted through her morning routine. Feeding Winston, their fluffy gray cat, who meowed and twined anxiously around her legs. She made herself a cup of tea, staring blindly out at the Boston skyline, but none of it soothed her spiraling thoughts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. "I'm here for you." Caroline typed a quick thank you, then paced the living room, debating what to do next. Should she storm into Daniel's office and demand the whole truth? Call her father, tell him everything? As she passed by the TV, a news ticker caught her eye. The anchor's solemn tone filled the empty space. An ongoing investigation into possible insider trading and financial misconduct at Whitmore Capital. CEO Daniel Whitmore's office has yet to release a statement, but sources say the SEC is examining suspicious transactions and unauthorized information leaks. Caroline fumbled for the remote, turning the volume up as dread slammed into her ribs. Investigation? Insider trading? This was the first she'd heard of any official trouble. The anchor continued. Whitmore Capital has risen quickly in recent years, with many calling Daniel Whitmore the next Elon Musk or Bill Gates. But today, regulators question whether that growth was fueled by illicit means. Daniel Whitmore was seen dining privately last night with an unidentified associate, sparking speculation about hush money and off-record deals. Caroline's pulse roared in her ears. She saw it so clearly now. Briar and Oak, the secluded table, Sabrina Chen leaning in close. Was that dinner part of this? She grabbed her phone, scanning every financial news outlet she could find. Headlines exploded with the story. Whitmore Capital under federal scrutiny. SEC probe, secrets, lies, and billions at stake. But there was no direct link to Sabrina, just whispers that Daniel's private meetings might hold key evidence. Anxiety clawed at her throat. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This could destroy everything. Their money, his company, their child's future. She dialed Daniel's number, voicemail. She called Amanda Wu, his hyper-efficient assistant, voicemail again. Heart pounding, Caroline forced down the swell of panic. Forget the heartbreak, she told herself fiercely. Protect your child, protect yourself. She threw on her coat, grabbed her bag, and stepped into the hall. If she had to confront Daniel face-to-face in his glass fortress, then so be it. Whitmore Capital's offices occupied the 20th through 22nd floors of a sleek steel and glass tower in downtown Boston. When Caroline stepped into the lobby, the usual hum of brisk greetings and clacking heels was replaced by a tense, uneasy hush. Small clusters of employees huddled in nervous whispers, casting worried glances at the row of men in dark suits rifling through file cabinets and laptops. It was clear. The investigation had already dug in deep. Caroline stepped out of the elevator on the 22nd floor. Daniel's domain, with its sweeping view of the Boston skyline. She braced herself for the sight of more strangers tearing apart the company he built from scratch. Sure enough, the reception area outside his office buzzed with investigators and tense staff. She strode up to a stern-looking man flipping through a stack of documents. "Excuse me, I'm Caroline Whitmore. I need to see my husband." The man barely looked up, his tone flat with fatigue. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Appointment? I'm his wife. Is Daniel in his office?" The man jerked his chin toward a closed door. "He's in with SEC officials and legal counsel. It's best if you wait." "I'm not waiting," Caroline snapped. She didn't spare him another look as she marched to Daniel's office door. She tried the handle, locked. She knocked hard, ignoring the murmured protests behind her. After an agonizing minute, the door swung open. A slender woman in a sharp navy suit, phone pressed to her ear, blocked the doorway. She scanned Caroline from head to toe with a tight, unreadable expression. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're in the middle of a confidential session." Daniel's voice cut through. "Let her in." The lawyer stepped aside. Caroline swept past her, shutting the door firmly behind her. Daniel stood at his massive desk, arms folded, exhaustion etched into his face. Two men in dark suits, obviously SEC agents, sat opposite him, legal pads open, eyes flicking from Caroline back to Daniel. One of the agents stood. "We'll give you a few minutes, Mr. Whitmore." He and his partner gathered their files and left without a word. Silence settled like a storm cloud. For a heartbeat, husband and wife simply stared at each other. The bitter taste of last night's fight hung between them. Accusations, betrayal, and now this. Daniel exhaled, dragging a hand over his face. "Caroline, I was going to call you once this blows over." Caroline's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream that she hadn't slept, that her mind hadn't stopped replaying every lie, every denial, while she pictured him with another woman, plotting ruin for the life they'd built. Her anger snapped back, razor sharp. Blows over? Daniel, you're under investigation by the SEC. It's on every major network. This is not some pothole in your precious road to success. He looked pained. I can't say much right now. It's an internal review. The lawyers want full cooperation, but no public statements yet. There are rumors, but it's a misunderstanding. We'll clear it up. Caroline's eyes narrowed. Does this have anything to do with Sabrina Chen and that dinner last night? Daniel flinched. Barely, but she caught it. Why would you even? Because the media is already speculating, she hissed. If you were with her to plan some shady insider trade, tell me the truth, Daniel. Right now. Stop, he barked, lifting a hand like he could physically push her words away. I can't discuss Sabrina. Not here, not now. Just trust me. I have this under control. Caroline's laugh came out brittle, half a sob. She stepped closer, her voice low and trembling. You lied to me in my own house, you lied to the world, and now you stand here telling me to trust you? Look at this room, Daniel. This is your control? Caroline nearly laughed in his face. Under control? This entire building is crawling with investigators. I couldn't even get Amanda to answer her phone. Amanda's with the attorneys. I told her not to speak to anyone until this is handled. Daniel snapped, though beads of sweat glistened at his hairline. It's all standard procedure. Standard procedure? Caroline echoed, her voice cracking with disbelief. How deep does this go, Daniel? Because if you think I'm going to sit at home pregnant while you flirt with prison time, you're out of your mind. I didn't break any laws, he shot back, but his voice wavered at the edges. Sabrina, she gave me some tips about a tech company. She claimed she had reliable intel. And you used it, Caroline pressed, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. He swallowed hard. Not exactly. I just shifted some assets around. I didn't realize it would be considered insider information. She told me it was her own research, that it was legit. I never thought the SEC would come pounding on the door. Caroline's mind spun. So he had used Sabrina's so-called tips, almost certainly crossing a legal line. She stared at him, fighting to match this desperate man in front of her with the confident, unstoppable husband she'd married, the father of the baby kicking inside her right now. Finally, she asked quietly, What do you want from me, Daniel? He looked stricken, running a shaky hand over his face. I need you to trust me. I'm meeting with Sabrina this afternoon to clear things up. She owes me an explanation. If she fed me illegal tips, that's on her. My lawyers can argue I was misled. Caroline's breath caught. You're meeting her again? After last night? It's business, he insisted, his voice rising a notch. Look, I know how bad this looks, but if you want to protect this family, you'll let me handle this. I promise I'll fix it. Part of Caroline still wanted to cling to that promise. But she could see it now. Raw guilt and confusion flickering behind his eyes. His ambition, once magnetic, had turned reckless. It might destroy him. Maybe she should pack a bag, call her father, and leave this mess behind. But she couldn't, not yet. She was carrying his child. And shamefully, painfully, some part of her still loved him. She gave a stiff nod. Fine. But I'm not disappearing while you fight this alone. I'm staying in the city. I'll help however I can. Daniel let out a breath, relief washing over his features. He reached for her hands, but she stepped back just out of reach. I'll trust you, for now, she said, her voice trembling. But trust isn't endless, Daniel. You've already broken it once. That afternoon, Caroline drifted through the penthouse like a ghost. The SEC had allowed Daniel to keep working at the office, but he was under strict orders to provide any documents they asked for, and Sabrina Chen was now officially flagged as a person of interest. Caroline tried to calm herself. She set up a quiet spot by the window, turned on soft classical music, and sipped tea to soothe her restless baby. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel leaning across that restaurant table, brushing Sabrina's hair behind her ear. How did it come to this? She wondered bitterly. Was I blind this whole time? A phone call from an unknown number snapped her out of her thoughts. Heart hammering, she picked up. A brisk, polished female voice said, Hello, Mrs. Whitmore? This is Caroline Patterson. I'm a journalist with the Boston Daily Chronicle. We're putting together a piece on Whitmore Capital's situation. Would you be willing to give a statement? Caroline's mouth went dry. No comment, she said quickly, and hung up. Within minutes, another reporter called. Then another. The entire press pack had clearly decided she was fair game for a juicy quote. Shaking, she switched off her phone and buried it under a pillow. The day dragged on in agonizing slow motion. When Daniel finally returned home, it was past 8. Caroline opened the door to find him on the threshold, his tie crooked, hair mussed, the look of a man fighting battles on too many fronts. "Any progress?" she asked, her voice low but steady. He nodded weakly. "The lawyers say there's no direct evidence yet, just allegations that we traded on insider info for a few deals. But they're not done digging, and Sabrina—" He paused, looking away. "We talked. She claims she's being made a scapegoat. She's flying back to Hong Kong tomorrow, says the SEC can't touch her there." Caroline's stomach lurched. "So she's running?" He gave a helpless shrug. "Or so she says. I begged her to talk to my lawyers, but she refused. She won't pick up my calls anymore. My legal team's furious. If she disappears, it makes me look guilty, like I'm hiding something." Caroline stared at him, her heart hammering. "Are you still sleeping with her, Daniel?" Color rushed to his cheeks. "No, Caroline. God, I messed up. I let things get too close. But it wasn't serious, not for me." She needed to believe him, but suspicion curled in her chest like barbed wire. "Is that the truth?" she whispered. "Or just what you want me to believe?" His voice cracked. "I swear, I'm not lying to you. Look, I promise you, my relationship with Sabrina was purely about business connections. Maybe it crossed some lines, but I never, ever planned to leave you." "Oh, how noble," Caroline whispered bitterly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Daniel, I can't keep doing this. I can't stand by and watch you wreck yourself and our marriage for your precious ambitions." He reached for her, his hand trembling, something she'd never seen from him before. For the first time, Caroline sensed real fear in his eyes. "Caroline, if we can survive this, if you stand by me, I will change. I'll fix it. I swear I will. Just don't give up on me." A sob fought its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. Deep inside, an exhausted part of her wanted to believe him, to cling to the fairy tale ending where the man she married came back whole and honest. But another part, the bruised, wiser part, whispered that fairy tales weren't real. She searched his face, and for a heartbeat, glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who'd once dreamed about building a beautiful life together, not just an empire. Hesitantly, she lifted her hand and touched his cheek. He closed his eyes and leaned into her palm, broken but desperate for her forgiveness. For a moment, they stayed like that, two people holding on to a love battered nearly beyond recognition. By the next morning, Caroline knew she needed guidance. She dialed the one person who would tell her the truth, her father, Richard Morgan. Despite their complicated relationship, he had never hidden his skepticism about Daniel's ruthless, fast-track ambition. Richard had always been the steady, unflinching anchor in her life. "Dad?" she said softly when he answered. "Things are bad. Daniel's company is under investigation. There's talk of insider trading." She heard him exhale slowly. "I saw the news. Sweetheart, are you all right?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He might have cheated too. I feel like everything is falling apart." His voice gentled. "Caroline, focus on yourself and the baby first. Stress isn't good for my grandchild. You have to stay strong." She pressed a fist to her lips, fighting not to break down. All she'd wanted was a quiet life, a safe home, a loyal partner. Now she had scandal, betrayal, and a future so uncertain it made her bones ache. A small sob broke free. "I know, Dad. What should I do? Should I leave him?" There was a pause on the line. "That's not a choice I can make for you. But listen carefully. Daniel has always been a risk-taker. That's part of how he climbs so high so fast. But it's also how men like him lose everything. You have to ask yourself, can you trust him to really change? If not," she closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand." His voice turned firm again. "If you need a place to stay, come home. Your old room is still yours. Or I can set you up in a nearby condo. No pressure. But you will not face this alone." A fragile warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Dad. I'll let you know." After the call, Caroline sat by the window, watching the Boston skyline glitter under the early sun. Her mind drifted to gentler days, meeting Daniel at a charity gala her father had hosted, the spark in his eyes as he talked about chasing big dreams, the shy note he'd tucked into her coat pocket asking for their first date. Where had that man gone? Meanwhile, Daniel's day took a sudden turn. He was due at the SEC's downtown office for a voluntary interview. His legal team insisted that cooperating fully would help his case. But an hour before he was set to leave, a text from an unknown number buzzed on his phone. "Meet me at the Park Regency Hotel, room T02. Urgent, Sabrina." His heart thudded painfully. Why is Sabrina reaching out now? She'd claimed she was leaving the country. What could be so urgent that she'd risk contacting him? He showed the message to his lead attorney, Edward Langley. Langley's frown deepened immediately. "This is reckless, Daniel. She's already under scrutiny. If the SEC catches wind of this, it could look like you're trying to collude." Daniel's jaw tightened. "If she has information that can clear my name or save the company, I can't ignore it." Langley sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We can't physically stop you, but take someone with you, or at the very least let one of the associates go in your place." Daniel shook his head. "She won't talk if there's a lawyer there. I'll go alone, but I'll record everything." Langley looked far from convinced. "Be careful, and for God's sake, don't offer her money or anything they can twist into bribery." Daniel nodded grimly. He texted back, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Then he turned to his driver. "Take me to the Park Regency." Anxiety prickled under Daniel's skin as the car pulled up to the Park Regency. Every scenario flickered through his mind: a sting operation, an SEC setup, or worse, blackmail straight from Sabrina herself. When he reached room 1902, the door was slightly ajar. He rapped his knuckles on it lightly. From inside, soft classical music played. Sabrina's voice floated out, smooth and teasing. "Come in." He stepped into the spacious suite, scanning the lavish room: marble floors, plush cream sofas, a vase of fresh roses on the coffee table. By the window, Sabrina stood in a sleek black dress, perfectly poised, every inch the elusive femme fatale. Her eyes locked on him. "Don't hover by the door, Daniel. We don't have all day." He stayed near the entry, tension coiled tight in his shoulders. "Why did you call me here, Sabrina?" She glided a manicured hand toward the sofa. "Relax, sit down, let's be civil." He didn't budge. "I'm not here to chat, talk." Sabrina's smile was brittle, though her voice dripped honey. "I'm leaving for Hong Kong tonight. I just wanted to smooth things over. I never meant for you to get dragged into this mess." He barked a humorless laugh. "You fed me illegal tips, Sabrina. That's exactly how I ended up in this mess." She arched an eyebrow, her tone sharpening. "Oh, please, don't play the innocent. You're not some naive schoolboy, Daniel. You knew the risks. No one bets millions without doing their own homework. You wanted a shortcut, and I gave it to you." His hands curled into fists at his sides, but she didn't give him a chance to fire back. "Enough about blame," she said smoothly. "I have a solution. A gift, really. I can produce documents, emails, messages, showing I lied to you, that you relied on what you thought was legit research. If the SEC believes that, you'll get a slap on the wrist at most." Daniel's heartbeat thumped wildly. "You'd admit you lied?" A coy smile ghosted her lips. She crossed the room to a small marble table, picked up a slim folder, and tapped it with a manicured nail. "Everything's here. Correspondence, transcripts, very convincing. All you have to do is make it worth my while." His eyes narrowed. "How much?" Her smile widened, a snake baring its fangs. $5 million. He nearly choked. $5 million? Sabrina, that's blackmail." She tilted her head unbothered. "Call it compensation. After this, I'll be blacklisted. No more deals with your connections, no more favors. I'll have to rebuild my network from scratch. This covers the inconvenience." Daniel's mind spun. $5 million was huge, but if Whitmore Capital crashed, he could lose everything. Yet if he paid her, it was bribery, plain and simple. That could bury him even deeper than the insider trading charges. He stepped back, shaking his head. "No, absolutely not. My lawyers would hang me out to dry if they even heard this conversation." Sabrina rolled her eyes. "Your lawyers won't save you when the SEC hauls you into court. Without my help, you're looking at jail time, Daniel." He glared at her, fury bubbling. "So this was your game all along? Feed me risky tips, reel me in, and bleed me dry once I'm cornered?" She snorted. "Don't kid yourself. You chased me. We used each other. Now finish what we started and pay up, or brace for impact." His pulse thundered in his ears, but he forced his voice to steady. No. If you have evidence that clears me, give it. If not, get out of my way. Her eyes went cold, her smile gone. Think very carefully, Daniel. You have a lot to lose. I'm done here. He spun on his heel and strode out. His heart slammed against his ribs, not just with anger but raw fear. If Sabrina leaked her own version, she could twist every fact to bury him. And the SEC meeting loomed just hours away. Back at Whitmore Capital, Daniel found Langley waiting. He recounted every word. The attorney's face blanched. She asked for money? Jesus, Daniel, that's textbook witness tampering. If we even breathe on that offer, it's another felony. Daniel groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. You're right, we have to tell the SEC before she does. Let's get this over with. Daniel and Langley moved quickly, heading straight to the SEC building, with Caroline, who'd insisted on coming for moral support, walking quietly beside them. She didn't speak much, but when they were ushered into a conference room, she caught Daniel's eye and gave him the smallest nod. Despite everything, she was still there. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Francesca Morales, greeted them with icy courtesy. Mr. Whitmore, we appreciate your cooperation. We have some questions. Langley offered a strained, polite smile. Before we begin, we'd like it on record that Miss Sabrina Chen attempted to solicit money in exchange for certain statements. Morales arched an eyebrow. Interest immediately piqued. That's quite a claim. Do you have any proof? Daniel's stomach clenched. He'd almost forgotten he'd hit record on his phone the moment Sabrina started talking. He caught Langley's glance, then pulled out his phone and handed it over. It's all there, he said quietly. We didn't pay her. We walked out. Morales listened to the audio through a pair of discreet headphones, her expression granite still. When she pulled them off, she spoke evenly. We'll verify the recording's authenticity. If legitimate, Miss Chen's behavior could constitute blackmail. Then her eyes pinned Daniel with unsettling precision. But that does not absolve you, Mr. Whitmore. Regardless of Miss Chen's motives, if you traded on insider information, knowingly or not, you are still legally responsible. Daniel's throat bobbed. I understand. And so it began, a slow, suffocating interrogation. Morales pressed him on every deal, every email, every meeting with Sabrina. Daniel forced himself to stay calm, answering truthfully but glancing at Langley for guidance when needed. Occasionally, Caroline spoke up. Soft corrections, reminders of how Daniel had spent nights cross-checking company reports, how he'd never hidden work from her. Morales scribbled down everything. After endless hours, they were finally dismissed. Langley explained in hushed tones that it might take weeks for the SEC to decide whether to file charges. But for now, they were free. Caroline exhaled shakily. Daniel just stared at the marble floor, jaw clenched. This is far from over, he muttered. Word of the SEC meeting exploded through Boston's finance circles. Gossip swirled that Sabrina Chen had vanished overseas. The press feasted on every crumb. Pregnant wife blindsided, secret mistress at center of scandal, billionaire genius or crooked fraud. Headlines grew uglier by the hour. Investors panicked. Though Whitmore Capital was privately held, its affiliate public partners saw stock prices nosedive in after-hours trading. Daniel worked frantically, endless calls, desperate emails, promises whispered into speakerphones. Some backers stuck by him. Others jumped ship. The board of directors demanded an emergency meeting to chart survival tactics. Caroline watched it all crumble from the sidelines, helpless and heartsick. Every day, new photos leaked. Daniel and Sabrina at charity galas, tucked in corner booths at private dinners, her hand grazing his arm, his smile soft and unguarded. The press spun a narrative of a steamy affair. Caroline's chest twisted with jealousy, betrayal, and horribly, the remnants of love that refused to die. One night, Daniel slammed through the front door, keys skittering across the kitchen island. We lost another investor. The board's at my throat. Caroline, who had been pacing the apartment, approached him slowly. You need to make a clear public statement. Lay out what really happened. Explain the insider allegations and the truth about Sabrina. People need to hear it from you. Daniel's palm slammed onto the marble counter with a sharp crack. I can't. The lawyers forbid it, Caroline. Anything I say could be twisted in court, and if I comment on Sabrina, I'm just giving the tabloids more ammunition. She fought to keep her voice calm. So you do nothing? His eyes, bloodshot and exhausted, flicked up. Yes, for now, we wait. The lawyers say silence is safest until the SEC finishes their inquiry. Then we'll fight back. Caroline just nodded numbly, swallowing down everything she wanted to scream. She'd never felt more shut out or more alone. The tension inside the penthouse grew suffocating, like invisible walls pressing in closer each day. Daniel swung wildly between frenzied work calls and brooding, stone-faced silence, leaving Caroline alone to drown in her racing thoughts. A few days later, her father, Richard Morgan, appeared unannounced at the penthouse door. Daniel was at the office. Caroline welcomed him inside and poured him tea, grateful for the familiar calm in his steady presence. "You look exhausted," he said gently. "I can't sleep," Caroline confessed. "It just keeps replaying in my head, over and over." Richard set his hand over hers, his thumb rubbing reassuring circles. "Come home with me for a while. Clear your mind. Let Daniel deal with this chaos on his own." She hesitated, her chest tightening. I don't want to feel like I'm abandoning him." "You wouldn't be abandoning him, sweetheart," Richard said firmly. "But you're pregnant. You're stressed to the point of breaking. That's not safe for you or the baby. You need calm, not SEC agents and tabloid vultures at your doorstep." Caroline looked down, one hand drifting to her belly. She'd spent so many sleepless nights worrying about Daniel that she'd barely thought about herself, or the tiny life depending on her. After a long silence, she finally nodded. "You're right. Let me pack a bag." Within an hour, she was settled in the back of her father's car, leaving the suffocating penthouse behind for the quiet of Connecticut. She left Daniel a simple note on the kitchen island. "I'm going to Dad's for a few days to rest. I hope you understand." She didn't expect an immediate reply, and none came. Days blurred into a week. At Richard's estate, Caroline found a fragile rhythm. The house staff doted on her, preparing fresh meals, insisting she nap when the anxiety threatened to crush her lungs. Bit by bit, her body relaxed, but her heart stayed tangled in knots. She kept a cautious eye on the financial news. Whitmore Capital teetered at the brink, whispers of investors jumping ship, speculation that Daniel might resign if indicted. She tried not to picture him alone in that glass tower, fraying at the seams. Then, one afternoon, her phone rang, a number she recognized immediately. Amanda Wu, Daniel's ever-reliable assistant. Amanda's voice trembled with tension. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I think you need to know this." Caroline's pulse spiked. "What is it, Amanda?" "A man came by the office, Kyle Peterson. He's one of Mr. Whitmore's old associates. He says he has documents that could clear Mr. Whitmore completely. But Daniel's so overwhelmed, he barely listened. Kyle claimed Sabrina Chen conspired with another firm to sabotage Whitmore Capital. He said it's personal for her, something about an old family grudge." Caroline pressed a hand to her forehead. "An old family grudge?" Sabrina never mentioned anything like that to Daniel. "I don't know details," Amanda said quickly. "But Kyle swears he has proof. Emails, data trails. He says Sabrina manipulated numbers to make it look like Daniel was trading on inside info when she was the real puppet master. He's tried to email Daniel, but with the SEC monitoring everything, I think it's getting lost in the chaos. And Daniel probably thinks it's too out there to be true. But Kyle sounded desperate, and I believe him." Caroline's mind raced, fragments of Sabrina's icy smile flashing through her memory. The idea chilled Caroline to the bone. Sabrina's blackmail attempt might just be the tip of an elaborate trap. What if she'd orchestrated this whole disaster, baiting Daniel into ruin while pocketing her own payoff? It made too much sense, given her sudden vanishing act and the brazen hush money demand. "Amanda, can you connect me directly with Kyle?" Caroline asked quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll text you his number right now." Minutes later, Caroline was on the phone with Kyle Peterson himself. Kyle explained everything in a tense, hurried voice. Sabrina's father, Wei Chen, had once battled Daniel for a massive Chinese tech merger. Daniel's win had cost Wei Chen millions and humiliated him back home. Kyle believed Sabrina had plotted revenge for years, posing as an ally while weaving a web of fake insider tips and doctored data. When the time was right, she made sure the SEC would sniff it out. "I have files showing her father funded the entire scheme," Kyle said. "Plus, I have a recorded call. Sabrina bragging how easy it was to reel Daniel in. She laughs about how blind he was." A cocktail of fury and fragile hope surged through Caroline. If Kyle's proof held up, it could exonerate Daniel completely. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" she demanded. Kyle hesitated. "I only pieced it together a few days ago. I was sorting old servers and email accounts from side projects Daniel and I ran years back. We had a falling out, long story. But once I saw what Sabrina did, I knew I had to speak up." "Thank you," Caroline said, her voice fierce with gratitude. "Please get every scrap of that evidence to Daniel's lawyers, and send a copy to me too." The next morning, despite her father's protests, Caroline packed her bag and caught the first train back to Boston. "Caroline, you don't need this stress. Stay here where you're safe," Richard pleaded. She shook her head. "If this can save him, I have to be there." When she reached Whitmore Capital, chaos ruled the sleek glass tower. Daniel sat slumped at a conference table, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and piles of frantic paperwork. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt. The board of directors was in open revolt. The press dubbed him the next Bernie Madoff. Caroline stepped inside the boardroom and laid her hand gently on his shoulder. He flinched, then turned. Relief and disbelief crossed his exhausted face. "Caroline, you're back?" She nodded firmly. "I have news. I spoke to Kyle Peterson." Daniel frowned. "Kyle? God, I haven't thought about him in years." Caroline recounted everything. Sabrina's family feud, the rigged tips, the manipulated reports. Daniel's eyes widened. The first flicker of real hope sparking since this nightmare began. "If Kyle has that proof, we can show the SEC I was a pawn. This changes everything." "It does," Caroline agreed. "But we have to move fast, before Sabrina vanishes for good." Daniel immediately summoned Langley and the entire legal team. Within the hour, Kyle arrived, hauling a battered briefcase brimming with paper files and thumb drives. He laid it all out. Forged reports, doctored research, private emails showing how Sabrina funneled tips to Daniel. The final nail in Sabrina's coffin, an audio clip where she laughed and purred, "Daniel's so hungry for power, he'll never ask where the data comes from. By the time the SEC is done with him, he'll be toast." Langley's eyes gleamed with barely contained triumph. "This is exactly what we needed," Langley said, eyes gleaming as he tapped the pile of fresh evidence. "With this, we can build a case that Daniel was the victim of fraud. He'll still have to answer for sloppy due diligence, but the liability shifts drastically." Daniel sat frozen, as if someone had thrown him a life raft just before he went under for good. He turned to Caroline, his voice hoarse. "I don't deserve you. God, I was so reckless. I should have seen it coming." She laid her hand gently over his. "Let's just get through this, Daniel." Beneath her calm words, her chest tightened with all the fury and hurt she'd buried for weeks. She couldn't forget so easily. But for now, survival came first. Forgiveness would have to wait its turn. Armed with Kyle's documents and recordings, Daniel's legal team presented everything to the SEC. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Francesca Morales personally questioned them for hours, testing the evidence, verifying the authenticity of every file, and comparing it against Sabrina's earlier statements. 2 days later, the SEC released an official update. The focus of the investigation would pivot to Sabrina Chen and her co-conspirators. Daniel still faced scrutiny for negligence, but the threat of criminal insider trading charges all but vanished overnight. The media devoured the twist. Scheming Mistress orchestrates billionaire's downfall. Headlines exploded again, different, but no less scandalous. For Daniel, the worst was finally over. Prison was no longer on the table. Civil fines for ignoring red flags might come, and Whitmore Capital's reputation lay in tatters, but survival was now possible. Through the chaos, Caroline never wavered. She sat through tense legal calls, glared down reporters outside the tower, and coached Daniel through PR drafts. But inside, the fracture in their marriage lingered. A raw, quiet ache that neither apology nor press release could mend overnight. One night, after a brutal day of meetings and board calls, they sat side by side in the penthouse living room. Daniel poured himself a stiff scotch and handed Caroline a sparkling water. For a long while, they drank in silence. "Thank you," he murmured finally, "for not leaving me, for finding Kyle, for saving me from myself." She stared into her glass. "I did it for our child, and maybe for the Daniel I thought I married." He flinched at that, eyes shadowed. She went on, her voice tired but steady. "Where do we go from here?" Daniel swallowed hard, then emptied his glass. "I can't pretend this never happened. I failed you. I was blind, so obsessed with winning, I broke everything that mattered. He looked at her then, eyes begging for something she didn't yet know if she could give. A second chance not for the CEO, but for the husband he used to be. And Sabrina, Caroline started, then stopped herself. She shook her head. No, I don't want to say her name again. What matters is us. If there's any chance at all, it has to start with honesty, therapy, and time. A lot of time. Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear escaping down his cheek. I'll do whatever it takes. In the weeks that followed, Daniel formally stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Capital, installing a trusted senior partner to steady the company's battered image while he focused on mending legal loose ends. The board, though reluctant, agreed it was the only way to stop the bleeding. Caroline, meanwhile, turned her focus inward, on herself, her health, and the baby growing stronger every day. She invited Daniel to her prenatal visits, and he never missed one. They spoke softly in waiting rooms, eyes flicking to ultrasound screens that made their problems feel small, at least for a moment. Then, one crisp Boston morning in October, Caroline went into labor. Daniel rushed her to the hospital, panic and devotion tangled on his face. Hours later, they welcomed a healthy baby boy, Andrew Richard Whitmore. Andrew for Daniel's late grandfather, Richard for Caroline's father who never stopped protecting her. Holding their tiny son for the first time, Caroline and Daniel both felt it. A shift, fragile but real. A chance, at last, to begin again. The swirling chaos of the past year slowly faded, replaced by a fragile but steady hope. They had survived betrayal, scandal, and the brink of financial disaster. But life had given them this. A chance to start over, to be better. Epilogue. Short conclusion. Within the novel, over the following year, the SEC investigation officially closed. Daniel settled the negligence charge with a steep fine and a binding agreement for stricter compliance at Whitmore Capital. The firm, though bruised, stabilized under its new leadership, and Daniel quietly shifted his energy to philanthropic projects, hoping to repair his reputation among colleagues and those he loved. Sabrina Chen never resurfaced in the States. Rumor placed her in Hong Kong under her father's protection, but whispers of future lawsuits and extradition requests lingered wherever her name was mentioned. For Caroline and Daniel, the road back to trust was long and uneven. They stuck with therapy, learning to speak without deflecting, to argue without cruelty. Most of all, they poured their hearts into raising little Andrew Richard Whitmore in a home defined by warmth and honesty, things they once took for granted. There were nights of raw confessions and days when old pain flared up like a bruise that wouldn't quite heal. But gradually, Caroline found herself forgiving piece by piece, and Daniel worked tirelessly to become the man she once believed he was. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, life rarely is. But in the soft echo of their son's giggles and the quiet resilience of their renewed vows, they found something genuine. A love reborn from mistakes and a future worth fighting for. Though the headlines had once shouted betrayal and scandal, the final pages of their story remained unwritten, filled with the promise of redemption and a second chance at happiness. So, that's how Hannah's story comes to an end. Or maybe how her real story begins. And if you're still here with me, right now, reading these words until the very last second, then I know this story touched something deep inside you too, didn't it? What did we really learn here? Sometimes the ones we trust the most can break us in ways we never imagined. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Hannah couldn't control Ethan's betrayal, but she could choose not to let it define her. She chose to take back her dignity, protect her child, and rebuild a life on her own terms. Life has this cruel habit of shattering what feels safe and predictable. Yet every heartbreak can be a doorway to strength. For you reading this right now, maybe you're carrying silent wounds too. Maybe you're facing a betrayal, a loss, a storm you didn't invite. If so, remember, your peace is your responsibility. No one can steal it unless you hand it over. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Hannah found hers, one fragile step at a time. So can you. If this story gave you courage or even a tiny spark of hope, then do me a favor, dear friend. Don't keep it to yourself. Tap that like button, share this with someone who might need a reminder that broken doesn't mean defeated. and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. I promise, together, we'll keep telling stories that remind us all. Storms come, but so does calm, and we are stronger than we know. Until next time, stay gentle, stay brave, and protect your peace.